today is about how to develop an effective energy training plan for your staff. I'm Jay Mullen, Director of Programs Operations for Goldman Consulting, representing Energy Manager Support Services, and really looking forward to today's discussion. What we're going to be looking at is, starting off with this of how to develop those effective plans is looking at, what are the benefits? How can targeted training support your energy management goals? We're going to have you identify a specific objective and audience. So we want you thinking about like a specific objective that you want to address, something you want to address with your training that we'll work through as an example through today's workshop. And lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about how you take that example and develop that into a broader training plan within your organization and why that's important. We do have a participant workbook for everyone to follow along. So Helen did drop that into the chat. She will include that as we go along there. You may have downloaded it before, so please have this open, downloaded, either printed out or open on your screen to work along as we go. It includes brief summaries of the information we cover, but also some spaces to write down or take notes on what I talked about. We're going to work through that example. And as we go through the presentation, there's going to be little thumbnails in the top right corner, just as little place markers, so you know where in the workbook we are. And we do want this to be interactive. So if anyone has any questions or comments as we go, please feel free to raise your hand or to type into the chat. I have Helen Marsh here, our producer for this webinar, this workshop, to make sure everything goes smoothly, and she'll be monitoring the chat as we go. All right. So going into the questions we've seen from that opening question, how does your organization currently build staff knowledge and skills? Internal training sessions we give them, that's awesome. Combination of vendor courses, some seminars, toolbox talks. I'm guessing that's kind of like lunch and learns. There's lots of different names for these kind of like informal training sessions that are given internally, external, internal training, a mix of those. A lot of people seem to have that sort of mix going on as well. And we're going to talk about some of those examples and things as we move forward. So great seeing these different examples. My next question here on Menti is, what are the potential benefits of providing energy training? So that the question before was about, what are the ways that your organization provides training in general? But as energy managers, as people who care about improving energy efficiency, achieving energy carbon reduction goals, what are the benefits of providing that energy training? For those of you who just joined, there's some instructions to join menti.com and use a code at the top of the screen, or Helen has posted the link directly in the chat for you to use. So I'd love to hear what benefits you would want to get or have seen from providing energy-related training to your staff. Okay, so increased engagement from staff. I know one of the great things about energy management is you're integrating it through the organization. You're getting people engaged, involved, participating in the initiatives, helping you achieve your goals so you're not working alone on it, helping them identify, getting people to identify energy saving opportunities. In the strategic energy management program we're delivering for Save on Energy, we've seen some great examples on hunts for energy waste and the training that goes along that, getting staff involved in those, improving operational knowledge and efficiency, increasing awareness, helping employees understand why it's important. That's a big one, why it's important and how they contribute in their role so they know what they should be doing. All right, these are really great answers coming in here. Oh, what was that last one? Everybody on the same page with the same knowledge, better awareness, attention, exactly, energy awareness. Getting people all working together and contributing in valuable ways. So we've seen some really good examples that you provided on there, and it can be useful to remember that providing that training, like any others, can provide a lot of benefits to both staff and to your organization. I think a lot of those ones that we mentioned were those benefits to the organization, getting them involved, getting them engaged, improving efficiency, improving like that standardization of processes, identifying opportunities. But it's also important to remember that there's benefits to staff as well, helping them develop valuable skills, helping them feel more empowered, enhancing teamwork within your organization, reducing those errors or rework. So that helps the organization in terms of efficiency, but it also avoids frustration on the staff side, and it can help reduce supervision requirements as well as in terms of getting people following standard processes or understanding what's going on. So there's a lot of benefits that we can get out of this for the staff, for you as energy managers in terms of achieving your energy goals. What we're going to do now is talk a little bit about setting an objective and audience. So we're going to be looking at an example of addressing a particular need through training. And how do you identify appropriate training approaches, resources for a particular objective, to address a particular need within your organization? So we can go to page 1 in the workbook. And the first thing to do is thinking about identifying your objectives. What is a specific need that you have as an energy manager, as someone who's trying to achieve energy reduction goals, that training might be able to think about? So there's, you can think about, where are there knowledge or skill gaps? Like, are there data analytics skills that you really want to take advantage of that are maybe missing in the team? Knowledge around system operations, or we had workshops before on the road to 50,001. Is like, are there gaps in understanding what implementation of 50,001 looks like? It could be, is staff turnover causing interruptions to your efforts, resulting in inefficient operations? Is energy waste occurring because operations aren't consistent or staff aren't following appropriate procedures? I remember working with a winery where they thought they were really good at conserving water and everyone was using it efficiently and washing barrels. And then we actually measured how much water people used, and they found that some staff rinsed the barrels for 2 minutes and others left them rinsing for 15 minutes or more. And everyone thought they were doing a great job and doing what they were supposed to do. So there's a great opportunity for training on that to improve consistency and efficiency. Another thing to think of is, are you missing out on key information or opportunities because staff aren't actively involved in your energy management efforts? So I want you to think about a specific objective that you have as an energy manager, as someone in your organization that is striving to achieve energy savings, reduce carbon emissions, and think of an objective that training might be able to help with that. And I want you to write it down at the bottom of page 1 in your workbook. We're going to come back to that in a second. So before we move on, does anybody have any questions about selecting an objective or not sure? If you want to stick your hand up on that, but I would like everyone to choose a specific objective, something that you'd like to help achieve, because we're going to work through that as an example. The next step, now that you have your objective in mind, you want to define your audience. So with that objective in mind, I want you to think about who needs to develop new knowledge or skills to meet that objective. And it could be specific people. It could be targeting new employees who are coming into the organization, particularly if you're in a sector that has a fair amount of turnover. It could be new skills among existing employees. It could be people in a specific role or on a certain team. And there may be instances as well where all staff could benefit from training, others where it may be more targeted. If you have a specific person in mind, like, oh, we need to train so-and-so on some data analytics, because either they need to improve that or we need that and they're a good person to fill that gap in our team, that's okay. But I would encourage you to consider generalizing it to a role that will help feed into a broader training plan later on. So I mentioned, that example of, hey, this person on our team, we want to get them trained up in building data analytics skills. Okay, maybe that at the moment it's that specific person, but maybe you can generalize that into, we have a data analytics role in our energy team, and we need someone with these skills to fill that. So that can be a good way to think about it as well. So thinking about your audience, I'd like you to write down your target audience for the objective you have in mind at that bottom of page 1. So there's 2 boxes there on the bottom of page 1 in your workbook. If you haven't downloaded it yet, you can find it in the chat to download. And before we move on, does anyone have any questions about selecting an objective or audience, or isn't sure what their objective or audience might be? Feel free to come off mute or raise your hand. All right, great. Looks like everyone's on the ball. And again, we want to be encouraging participation here. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. Because right now, what I'm going to have you do is back to Menti. So keep that open in a browser or on your phone. I would like you to share your objective and audience. So we have an example here of training operators on improved shutdown procedures. So, if you're finding you're using a lot of energy in off hours, outside of production times, or when the facility is closed, maybe this is your objective. You want to train operators on improved shutdown procedures. But I would love to hear from you about the objective and audience that you have selected to work on today, that you have in mind. So you can go to menti.com, use the code at the top of the screen, 7830-1886, or Helen has the link in the chat there as well if you want. Would anyone, we see train operators use correct energy mix to attain efficiency? All right. And also, I would love to, this Menti is a great way to get, a broad range of answers. We have a large group today, so I do want to see those. But would anyone want to come off mute and share verbally with the group? I'd love to hear a bit more about these. Let's see. While I'm waiting for that, I'll look at some of these. Train stores staff to properly use smart thermostat set points, increase employee engagement, the audience's employees. Gonzalo, what's your objective and audience?
Well, actually, I could have put in several, but on the operators, we have a fairly complex energy mix. So we have a cogeneration plant, an internal to fairly large, like 2,000 kilowatt combustion engines. We do have some efficiency targets to meet and an incentive program. So we have generation targets to meet. However, financially, we're looking at, is it worth it to run the generator? So it's actually fairly complicated, and training operators to look at the tools we have to say, this is how you run, because you'll often find this, well, it's working now. Yes, but look at this, look at that, don't do this. So just to get them to use the tools that we have, that the energy manager and myself work together a lot, but to get them to know, look here, and then you'll know what to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example. I think, and there's two things that I'm picking up there. One is that, a lot of times when we, as energy managers, people working in energy, we're dealing with people who are already good at their jobs, and their jobs are, keeping things running, maintaining quality, maintaining comfort, whatever that is. And they just haven't been asked to consider these energy aspects before. So we're asking something new, but they're already doing a good job. And so how do we, provide the training to integrate that into it? And also sometimes, like you said, it is complicated. That sounds like a very complicated system. There's a lot of different factors. How do you decide what that energy mix should be? There's contractual requirements, there's cost considerations. I know I've talked to some with cogen, and there's also greenhouse gas emission considerations that come into that. So when we're dealing with these complicated things, you want to talk about not just what, but why. What is the reason? You need to get people to understand why they need to care about this, why it's important. What are all those different considerations that go into it? And all of that on top of the training of okay, how do you do that? I see some other great examples. Does anyone else want to share the objective and audience that they have in mind for today? I love hearing about these specific examples. Oops. Oh, geez, I lost that. There we go. Having owner, I like this one, having employees take ownership in energy projects and within the energy team. Max, I see you came off mute there.
Yeah, I'm running a global program. Let me just bring this down. So a global training program. So I'm hitting multiple areas. So in the next couple of weeks, I'll be doing training with the Australian division site level to get them to increase their knowledge of regression analysis, with the aim of doing monthly basic monitoring, targeting, and reporting. Then I've also got a separate sort of more of a discussion, but there's training in it, trying to improve the attitude and awareness of the global engineering directors, to start considering energy aspects when they're doing their capex analysis, and what's actually involved with that, to then sort of drive their team. So there's that sort of specific knowledge of the skills to do something with the basic monitoring, targeting at the site level folks, and then at the more senior levels, it's more that awareness and attitude is the objective.
Great. Yeah, and I think that's an interesting one too, because it actually gets into kind of a broad, like today we're talking about training and how do you bring in training, different approaches and establishing that program. But a lot of this starts butting up against or really getting into behavior change stuff as well. And I know when we talk about employee engagement, behavior change, we use, for those of you who may be familiar with an ADKAR model that ProSci developed, we're not going to get into that today, but training is a component kind of within that, and that broader one that talks about building that awareness and desire to make the change, that internal motivation for them, having that reinforcement as part of it. But that training, building the knowledge and capabilities within it, is a key part of that. So I think that's a really interesting part as well, of keeping that in mind as we go forward today. All right, that is great. So hopefully everyone has their objective and audience in mind. The next thing that I want to talk about is, if you have that objective in mind and the audience, the next thing you need to understand is what knowledge or skills does that audience need to achieve the objective. Now, we're all smart people here. We know a lot about energy and how things should be done. We may have a pretty good sense of that already. But if you don't, or even if you do, it's always good to check assumptions. And gather a little data to make sure that you really understand what are the knowledge and skills that are needed. So in Menti, I want you to come up with some ideas, and there's different options to choose on there. But think about, how will you identify what are the different gaps in terms of knowledge and skills that you need to see, that you're going to need to address within that. All right, so ask employees, ask managers. Now, one thing I'm not sure about is there's a lot of other options in the Menti one that aren't showing up on the screen right now. I'm not sure why those aren't showing up. But yeah, so it's a great idea to ask your energy manager, or ask employees, ask the managers. Sometimes there's a focus group, so bringing in different people who are involved and having them talk together around what's needed, because sometimes what's needed by the person doing it, their opinions might differ from the audience that they're presenting to or working for potentially. All right, okay, I've got another slide here so I can see more on that. Oh yeah, we've got a bunch on observing the operators as well, and consulting an external expert. So I really like the observing operators, because then you can see where those gaps are happening. And sometimes we've seen examples too where you think it's like, oh, the gap is in this area, and then you see them actually doing it, and you get a sense of where that gap is happening. Sometimes it's not always in the same place. Consulting an external expert can be really helpful if you don't necessarily have that expertise on your team, like if it's a gap you're looking to fill. And we have a couple people that chose other. I'm curious for if anyone who chose other on there, Max as well, what do you see as like a resource or approach you'd use to identify like where those gaps in knowledge or skills are?
So normally I would, if I was trying to look for specific training of a person. If I knew the person, I would use the approaches that you guys have listed. But in my case, I've been looking at like what is the performance of the metrics, the KPIs of the plant, and have they put in place certain actions and certain key things like are they monitoring their energy and setting targets, and are they creating reports on it? If there's a deficit in these components of energy management at a plant or a location, then I assume that either they don't know how to do that, or there's some other hurdle, and then I'll go in and sort of ask them and dig in. But that initial kind of like, where are the high level gaps and training requirements? I'm looking at our overall performance relative to these sort of almost like an energy management assessment, like what is missing in terms of the gap analysis, and then assuming that there's going to be training based off that, and then digging in from there.
Right. So doing that kind of initial scan, and it's like, maybe that knowledge and expertise is there and they're not using it, but I think that's like a good opportunity of like, hey, if they're not doing it, there's a good chance that there's a gap associated with that somewhere along the lines. I love that. One of the big ones, or a number of people did choose consulting an external expert, and I'd love to hear from someone who chose that as one of their options around why you see that as a good approach to identify the knowledge or skills related to your audience and objectives. So this is just a specific example of that. Would someone who has chosen to consult an external expert to identify those needs care to come off mute and share that?
I can share. Yeah, I think with the one that I was looking at are HVAC operational efficiencies, and often what I find is that it's not as straightforward and easy as it seems. You kind of expect and think that some controller or some boiler, just change the settings to what would have been designed, and that design data should be available, and it often isn't, and it's never as straightforward as it seems. So getting a commissioning agent or some subject matter expert involved to kind of answer all the questions and kind of unknowns that inevitably come up on step one when you think that it's an easy thing.
It's never as easy as we think it is, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really great because, I've seen ones where it's the external expert of like, hey, we're doing something new and we want to bring in someone with expertise to teach us how to do it, how to do this skill, develop the skill, do this knowledge. But I think, Chris, that was a really great example as well of, sometimes bringing that expert, it's not the general skill or knowledge that you're trying to learn, but it's like, okay, but what does this mean for our specific organization, facility, situation? So getting that expertise to think it's like, okay, yeah, we know we should control set points, and these are things we control, but like, all right, what should we specifically be training on in our organization to achieve that? Yeah, and I see a comment from Max there of, those external experts, they might know how to conduct the training needs assessment, also know more than you know. And I think that's an interesting point as well, where, and we'll touch on this a little bit later on in terms of thinking about whether you're doing it internally or externally, but external trainers or experts may have expertise in the realm of training and making that training stickier, making it more effective knowledge transfer within there. So I think that's an interesting point as well. The next thing that we're going to look at, so we're starting to think about where those gaps are, how we identify those gaps, but I want to think about what training approach is most appropriate. So before we choose the most appropriate approach, I'd like you to think of some examples of things we can do to help people build knowledge or skills. And maybe think to some of those, that first question we had about how does your organization currently develop knowledge or skills? So I want people to either come on mute and make some guesses or examples of approaches, types of training, types of ways we can transfer knowledge to people. I'd like to hear some examples. Come off mute and share. You can type them into the chat. 2 points for every right answer. Points are pretty meaningless in this context, but it's always fun to earn them. So who has some ideas of how we can go about training, different kinds of mediums or approaches we might be able to use? And there were some good examples before there, right? Classroom, theoretical versus hands-on. So yeah, we do have, instructor-led training, workshops, classrooms, that kind of thing. That's a great example there.
Hi, Jay.
Olga. Hi, Olga.
Because I did a few trainings, I just would like to share with others. So as a fun, we did energy efficiency Kahoot, right? And I think it was successful because our construction managers, they were saying, oh, I've never thought in a such way about energy efficiency, right? But we did, while we were doing benchmarking, we actually created a scorecard on different levels to give, and while we were developing, we were consulting with the people what they want to understand and see on energy consumption. So it's different levels of scorecard, say VP level, then it goes to district manager level, then it goes to store manager, district, I call it like a store level, right? But it's where you are looking at actually district, and then each store kind of individually. And each level helps to unleash different opportunities and understand better our data. Say on a store level, we can identify it's more deep in, and we can identify lots of stuff like simultaneous heating and cooling, but we can identify because the stores in the same group, they're in the same location, so they kind of should be equal. And we can identify whether it's operational issue, whether it's actually building issue, and we are talking then with actually operation guys and store staff. On a district level, when we analyzing different districts, of course it's weather dependent, but we still can see that there might be some findings that say certain districts they are more on electricity consumption and others on natural gas, and then you're looking at portfolio, and then you're looking at what could lead to it. So on a very high level, you have different insights, right? So and it all goes to education and to finding out opportunities together, right? And people are getting engaged when they understand more, and they're trying to help you. One another method we used is lunch and learn webinars, when we just collect people and explain them principle of energy. Or we did a new, we had a quarterly newsletters, and one of these quarters were devoted to energy efficiency, where we publicized our internal results on the projects and insights, and educate people on some different measures, what they can implement or at home or at office.
Yeah, and that's good. I think there's actually a few things that you mentioned there. Like there's, that those group activities, taking them along for the hunts as part of that. There's resources, like you mentioned, the checklist. I saw Murray also mention, heavy on standard operating procedures for training as well. You mentioned, having those webinars, lectures as part of it. Lots of points being given out here, I'll just say that.
So I have 5 missing, right?
We also saw, where was it in there? Sylvia mentioned mentoring or coaching internally, like having those peers in place. What else? Video how-to guides, on-screen training guides. Yes, that sort of e-learning. Even some organizations, they have the video training. Some have learning management systems in place as well, so that can be really useful. The other thing that I saw on there was reference materials, having like, hey, here's the standards we follow, here's learning that they can do on their own as well, like more in-depth guidance to learn about what's going on. The one that I didn't see pop up in the chat, or Olga in your description, and this one is maybe a little bit more niche as well, but using role playing of, in kind of a instructor situation, walking them through situations and, hey, what would you do? And having people act out and work on that as well. So these were really great examples. I think we covered about more of these than I maybe expected people to go through. Yeah, working through example problems kind of fits into that role playing one there, Max. And I think it's really useful, like in thinking about these, that question we had at the beginning about how your organization is already doing training and building knowledge and skills, to think about how can you leverage that existing infrastructure, those existing mediums, to tackle your energy training as well. So, Murray mentioned that the pharma industry is very heavy on SOPs for training. Awesome. That is a great opportunity to build in energy considerations. It's a great medium. They're already using that. It's something they're already familiar with. Leverage that as much as you can. In terms of framing these, I've grouped them into these three categories, which can be useful to think about because they have different benefits around them. So the ones on that left column are synchronous. So, they're happening live with a trainer or facilitator. And that can be really great in terms of imparting new ideas, new concepts. It gives an opportunity for the participants to ask questions. Hey, how does this apply to my situation? And get that two-way communication with a knowledgeable expert. The middle column here is all around that peer learning, which can be really useful, particularly it's longer term. That synchronous may be pretty time bound on it. A workshop, a lesson, a course over a certain amount of time. That peer training can be ongoing. It also provides a lot of benefits in terms of that observation of performance and giving feedback to improve. So it's like, hey, are you really taking what we've said and applying it, or are there still some gaps within that? And the last column is what we call asynchronous, which means that they can access it anytime. So there's benefits here of it's more flexible. It doesn't have to go along with the schedule of a trainer or a mentor or peers on that. It's really great for just-in-time learning. If there's resources where someone wants that training resource when they are doing the task, these are great things to look at. And it's important to kind of think about those. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail on these everyone's, but thinking about those different approaches, because some of these, depending on your objective, some of these may be appropriate than others, or maybe you want a mix of these. That's often the case. When you're thinking about which of those training approaches is going to be most impactful and effective for your specific objective, and again, we don't want to talk in generalities, like, oh yeah, we just want to do a whole bunch of workshops and instructor-led things and everything. You want to think about your specific objective and what is most relevant or going to be most appropriate. And in doing that, you want to think about both your needs and your haves. So your needs are your training objective. What does achieving that training objective need? It's your audience. What are the needs your audience has? Do they need an introduction to a new concept, that ability to ask an expert? Do they need that peer support on an ongoing basis? And then also your needs around knowledge or skills. What are the specific areas that you need that training in? Is it the general knowledge? Is it building that awareness? Or is it more specific in terms of applying that general situation to your unique situation? I think Chris's example of, like, yeah, we generally know how we should be running HVAC systems efficiently, but okay, but when we start looking at ours, it gets complicated. So understanding your needs in that sense. And then your haves. What do you already have? And that could include training budget, like is there budget available for external training or for different development of resources? What skills or knowledge exist in your organization already that you may be able to leverage? And also, what internal training capabilities do you have? Like, do you have that learning management system in place? Do you have experts that develop, effective training workshops, training webinars, that kind of stuff? So thinking about your needs, your haves, and I'm going to be asking you to take these considerations into account and thinking about what approaches might be best suited for your objective and audience. So start thinking about that, but I'm not going to ask you quite yet because I do want to look at a couple of examples first. I do see a comment from Max in the chat about a big consideration is availability of training participants, time away from normal duties. Yeah, and we do a lot of this training. That's a big thing, like having that flexibility. That asynchronous stuff comes in really useful on leveraging that. I know all the training capability building that we do for energy management support services directly with organizations. It's this, okay, what is best suited asynchronously, where people can have that flexibility, do it on their own time when they have time. It's not particularly onerous. Designing things so it's not particularly onerous takes a bit of finesse, but then that also frees up time when you do have that synchronous training with an expert, that you're getting the most value out of that, because that is sometimes difficult to find and coordinate. All right, so a couple of examples that I want to use to illustrate some of these needs and haves before I start asking you about the approaches that you think are going to be most appropriate. So the first one is coming from a property management company. So they had a large portfolio of buildings, and they found that there was a lot of energy waste occurring because of incorrect controls or other issues with their key significant energy users, those key systems like HVAC, even lighting controls. And when they were looking into this, they found that a big cause of it was turnover. They had lost a number of experienced building managers, and with that turnover, a lot of the knowledge resided with them. So those things, that energy efficiency, had started to slip. So they decided the most efficient approach to address this was to send some key staff to external training on energy efficiency for building managers. So get that understanding of what they should be doing, why should they be doing it, how do you manage buildings efficiently, and then leverage that knowledge both from the remaining experienced building managers that they had and the staff that they sent to the external training to develop internal guidance and reference materials that was more specific to their buildings, that they could use to educate the other staff, help people become consistent. They also helped establish a mentorship program to support new hires and reduce those risks associated with turnovers. So as new building managers came in, they had this new guidance, these new training materials in terms of how should they be managing their buildings, but they were also paired up with a more experienced building manager for check-ins, questions that came up along the way, challenges, making sure that they were following the expectations or filling in any gaps in that material that was provided as they went. The next example we have was from a manufacturing facility, manufacturing company. And what they noticed was that there was a lot of inconsistency in terms of energy performance of their production lines. They had a number of production lines that were fairly similar, but pretty significant energy consumption variations around that, both between the lines and at different times of the year or sort of at different periods. So they had standard procedures in place already, but those SOPs, they didn't necessarily prioritize energy efficiency, and they weren't always followed entirely. So this, the organization, they decided the training that we're going to do, our strategy to deal with these gaps, to meet those objectives, they leveraged their experienced operators, and they also started working with their equipment vendors to update those standard operating procedures and understand, what should the shutdown procedures look like? How should we be operating these in an efficient manner? So they brought those together to sort of develop an understanding of what was needed and start developing the training materials. And then they had those, with that material in hand, they had the team leads for the different manufacturing lines. They had them deliver that training on the updated procedures through presentations and on-the-job training to the teams running the different production lines. So they had that sort of synchronous training from the team leads, as well as updated documents, checklists, and things like that, and resources to help improve compliance with those procedures. So both an understanding of why are we changing these procedures, why it's important, what's involved in that, but then having some of that asynchronous, just-in-time material, visual workplace kind of stuff as part of that. So I mentioned before of thinking about which of these approaches are appropriate. And we talked about, the synchronous is really great for those new concepts, the peers for that ongoing advice, feedback to correct issues, and asynchronous, so things are available when they're needed, some flexibility in terms of learning around that. We're going back to Menti. So if you go back to your browser, if anyone joined late on this, you can go to menti.com, use the code at the top of the screen, 7830-1886, or Helen's dropping the link in the chat. And with your specific training objective in mind that we're working through, I'd like you to choose which of the approaches, synchronous, asynchronous, peer learning, you think is going to be appropriate or useful in achieving your specific objective. All right, we see getting a number of responses in now. Synchronous seems to be out in front. Would someone who selected synchronous as one that they think is going to be useful for achieving their objective, would you care to share your reasoning behind that? Why you think that's going to be really useful in helping you achieve your objective with your audience? If you'd like to come off mute and share that, that would be great.
The reason I chose synchronous was just because the type of things that our HVAC techs need to learn need to be hands-on in person. I think something more abstract or asynchronous or online just may not. I think they'll need that kind of hands-on. I need to see the screens. I need to, touch the valves. I need to really kind of feel and see exactly how this goes down, because the devil is in the details for the type of training that we need to roll out.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example, both on, like you said, they're going to be applying it in a hands-on manner. They need to see that in a hands-on manner. Like it's a complicated thing. The other part of that, I think, too, is, these are operators. They're already experienced. When they're learning this side of it, they're going to have questions. So having that synchronous approach where you have a knowledgeable expert there who can answer their questions as they're going through it, that's going to be very impactful. Gonzalo, I noticed you came off mute as well.
Yes, and I'm thinking similarly to many of the other folks. I think the other thing, sometimes peer learning is good, and we've used it. The problem is that sometimes the wrong practices get reinforced as well. So the synchronous, when you get everybody together and you can kind of hammer it out. And again, the other advantage, I think, with everybody together is you will sometimes find out, oh, this is why, or this is what happens. So sometimes, the energy manager even gets a sort of an understanding or a bit of schooling there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I've seen a lot of power in that peer learning, but yeah, you at least want to set that baseline of that peer learning isn't, going in the wrong direction on that for sure. I know someone said that they're not sure what approaches might be best for their situation. But the person who's not sure, care to share their objective, and maybe we can think through what might be an appropriate approach or a useful approach for that. while that person is considering coming off mute to share why they selected not sure, I see in the chat there, Murray said, introducing new concept, ISO 50001. Yeah, that's a good one. We've done a lot of training around ISO 50001, and that's a good one too of, people have questions. Explain this new concept. How does it fit into their organization? Like, what are the reasons why about it? Having that synchronous stuff can be a really great starting point around that. Shailesh said building operators prefer practical hands-on training than going through learning modules. Definitely. And I think that's a really thing, like when you go back to think of your needs and your haves, the needs around your audience, what do they respond to? Like sometimes we've seen people, it's like they love flexibility of asynchronous materials and the ability to use that. But sometimes depending on the nature of the work or the roles, like Chris said, it's a lot of hands-on work, so they want hands-on instruction, or even just understanding their people and how do they learn best can be a great opportunity there. I didn't see anyone come off mute in terms of the not sure, but if anyone does want to discuss that and raise their hand as well. Now, I do see the asynchronous at the bottom there. We talked a little bit about that. Does anyone who chose asynchronous as a good approach want to share their reasoning for that, like why they think that makes sense for their objective? Right. While there may be finding, but I will say it's like, it's not necessarily there's a one size fits all here. It depends a lot on what that objective, your audience, assessing what your needs are around that. And also I'll say it's often a mix of these, and it's not just one. Like even in Chris and Gonzalo's situations of choosing that synchronous, that can be a really important starting point, but you may need other training approaches to reinforce that and to expand it as we go. Allison, I see your hand there.
Hi, yes, sorry, I was just trying to figure out how to unmute or raise my hand. Yes, so to answer your question about why asynchronous would be chosen. So I did put synchronous as my first choice,
Okay.
but asynchronous I also had as an option specifically for like members of the kind of management team at the plant who are going to be doing, more desk work, and so they'll have time to reference documentation. And so, if I want to lean on them to do certain things, then maybe some reference materials are helpful for them to be able to go and find the answers themselves whenever they need to, and not have to rely on someone else to help them out with that.
I think that's a really great example of understanding the needs of your audience and their situation. Another one, kind of the opposite, like for senior people, having that flexibility and they're at the desk, that can be a really great opportunity to use asynchronous learning. We use a lot of asynchronous stuff in our onboarding things as well, because then they can access that. So you don't have people necessarily sitting around waiting for someone to have time to train them synchronously on things. They can dive right into it when they have time on that, so it can avoid some holdups or bottlenecks that can occur as well. Great. All right, moving on. The next question I have is, we've seen some examples too of, internal, external expertise on that. I'm going to give a little bit of clues on this afterwards, but first I want to see, working through your objective right now, and actually, some of them, Chris, you already had that in mind. We want external training. We want to bring in an expert for this. But I'd like everyone to go to Menti now and let me know what you think you have in mind in terms of whether internal training or external training is going to be appropriate, or that kind of go-to part for the objective that you have in mind. All right, they're pretty neck and neck. Internal is winning out slightly. I like treating these as a race. Definitely not a race on this. For someone who is, for someone else, we've heard some examples already that have come up in terms of using internal or external on this. I'd love to hear from someone who hasn't spoken yet, if you are brave enough to come off mute into this group, on why you have selected internal training and why you think that is going to be a great option for your objective and audience. I'd really love to hear an example of why internal training is going to be a good option to achieve your objective. Gonzalo, I see you coming on there. No one else has raised their hand. I'd love to hear from you again as well.
Okay. I think we're kind of spoiled here. One of the things that I would call internal training, because we have availed the use of, we do have an energy management program here at Algonquin College. So they can be considered internal, although it's technically almost external, but they have sometimes come and given us some things. The other thing is that we have actually, I'm sort of more in supervision. I've got the energy manager certification, but we have also a dedicated energy manager and a fairly good BAS controls person. So internally, for a lot of the objectives we want, if we get everybody together and say, okay, this is what's going on. So between the energy manager and myself, we can sort of give the theory, you know, we're saving energy, with the BAS guy and perhaps an experienced operator, and this is why we're doing this. So we have that, and for just some overviews or short sort of little lectures, again, we have found it helpful to avail ourselves of the energy management program here at the college.
That's great. I think that's a great example. Like, if we go back to those needs and haves, like, you have some good expertise internally that you can leverage on that, and that's an excellent opportunity to take advantage of. I also see from Max on the other side, external training, when available in one area, allows them to focus on internal training in others. So, you know, what do you have? What resources do you have? If you don't have a lot of time, there's a lot of things to go on. Okay, what are those areas that you can offload, that you can delegate, that you can take advantage of external training for? And that's a really good option. So you can focus your internal training efforts and the time that you have on other areas where that is more impactful to basically increase your impact overall. All right, so that's really great. On page 4 of the workbook, we do have a short checklist of, you know, if you're not sure, should you use external trainers, thinking about, you know, does the objective require skills, knowledge specific to your equipment, facility, organization? Does it require knowledge or expertise that reside within your organization? Do you have internal training infrastructure in place? I love that example. It's like, we're a college, we do training. we have people who know how to do that. And do you have the budget for that external training? So those are some of those considerations that can come into. Bring that together into a training plan. So we talked about looking at a specific objective and how you identify those specific needs and what approaches are most appropriate for that. What a training plan does is it sort of pulls, you may have multiple objectives. I think, you know, we heard from people earlier on where it's like, you know, I've got a bunch, but here's one. So pulling that training plan together does a few things. It can be really helpful in terms of presenting as a whole, getting buy-in around that plan. It gives you an opportunity to see what those different training needs are and prioritize those. So there could be a lot of benefit into pulling that together. Some things to think about in that training plan is first, you know, bringing together the outcomes of any training needs assessment. If you did a training needs assessment, if you had an external company do a training needs assessment that identified some of these gaps, those discussions with staff, managers, with experts, that kind of stuff, summarize the outcome in there. That's a good starting point. Show the prioritization of those training needs. Are some, it's like, hey, we need this training to be like, to meet regulatory compliance issues, or this training in this area is going to address a critical need that we're dealing with, provide multiple benefits. How are those different needs prioritized? You want to provide that justification. We talked about how you choose different training approaches and what some of those different training approaches can look like, but provide that justification. Why is internal for this particular objective? Why is that internal training, maybe peer learning, more appropriate versus, you know, in a different audience, different objective? why a different approach is used on that. Another thing that we haven't touched on today that's really useful to include is expected outcomes in your measurement plan. So it can be really helpful both in terms of getting buy-in and support for this, but also to demonstrate the value of the training after the fact to support more training is, how are you thinking about how are you going to measure the outcomes of this? And sometimes it's easy. It's if the training is on better shutdown procedures, you can pretty easily measure, how was our energy consumption before the training? How was our energy consumption off hours after the training? But getting that feedback in there can be really important. You can put in timelines. When do we need this training done? Are there specific timelines to meet specific requirements? Like, hey, we need everyone trained on this by end of year or by certain times for this rollout to support achievement of goals. Are those timelines relative to like employee start dates if this gets rolled into onboarding practices or things like that? You do want to think about that training budget, which also feeds into the last part of endorsement. So getting that support for the plan, sign off, and approval on that. We do have, through Save on Energy, there is training type support available. The ISO recently launched a training and support website that has a lot of resources on there. It's going to have a training calendar for workshops like this. It's going to have online video lessons on different subject areas and tools and toolkits for you to use. On there, the Save on Energy program also gives incentives for training courses. If you're looking at external training, like building operator training, certified energy manager training, those kind of things. This workshop is under Energy Manager Support Services through Save on Energy. So we do provide workshops like this to the community. We also have asynchronous online resources available through the Energy Management Learning Platform, as well as like a peer discussion forum. We really do appreciate and support and try to encourage that peer sharing, that peer knowledge that goes on through it. And lastly, Save on Energy offers a strategic energy management program, which is a 2-year curriculum for your organization to build capabilities around energy management. I see a lot of people on the call that are already part of that program that are going through it. If you have any interest in it and aren't aware of it yet, please let us know. In page 4 of your participant workbooks, there are links to all of these programs and offerings through Save on Energy. I've got two more things quickly to get to, but before I do, please let us know what you thought about today's workshop. We want to continually improve. Helen's going to put the link in the chat. If you're not immediately at your computer, you can use the QR code on the screen. It's really short, 2 minutes to fill out the survey. We really appreciate your feedback on how we can improve these sessions. The link is in the chat now for you to complete that feedback form. I'm going to pause for 30 seconds for people to get started on that before I give the 2 last things for wrap up. One of them is through Save on Energy. We do have expert training, coaching, advisory support. Even if you're not part of those other programs, you can sign up to Energy Manager Support Services, get access to the Energy Management Learning Platform, and put your questions up there. We have a roster of subject matter experts for improving energy management practices. If you have industrial energy efficiency projects that have questions about scoping opportunities, what's a good fit, how to estimate savings, any of those, free advisory support available through Save on Energy. I encourage everyone to take advantage of that. It's a great opportunity to just run your questions by some of the experts that we have on deck.